So a crackdown on these so-called shady lending practices, would it hurt more than help in a very fragile housing market?
Our Fox panel joins us now to discuss this. We have Pat Powell from Powell Financial, Gary Kaltbaum from GaryK.com, Joran Brook from the Ayn Rand Institute, Victoria Barrett from Forbes, and Peter Schiff, author of Crash Proof. Peter, we haven't seen you in a couple of days. Here comes the Fed, requiring things that, frankly, a lot of people thought should have been required in the first place, such as quality documentation and all kinds of other issues that you say, well, I had to do that for my loan, but what about all these people who didn't? Do you think the Fed is going to make a difference here, and should they be getting involved?
No. I mean, all of this is going to come about anyway without the Fed. I mean, lenders are realizing their mistakes, and they're not going to repeat them. But the root cause of those mistakes in the first place was the Fed itself and its inflationary monetary policy, irresponsibly lowering interest rates the way they did and leaving them there. So they created this Frankenstein. You know, it's ridiculous for them now to be trying to think about ways of dealing with it. In fact, what they're doing now is more of the problem. They still have interest rates much too low, and they're lowering them. They should be tightening up on money supply. They should be raising interest rates right now and let the market sort this out. Yes, it means home prices are going to go down, but they have to go down.
Well, Victoria, it's hard to argue with the fact that those rates were held low for such a long time by Alan Greenspan. A full year Fed funds rate at 1%. So clearly that had a lot to do with our problems. Will the regulations make the problems worse?
I fear they will, simply because the subprime market is going to evaporate. If you are a lender, you're not going to want to touch that market for fear of lawsuits, because part of this proposal puts more onus on lenders to verify whether someone can pay back their loan. And that's just going to be a bonanza for trial lawyers. And it also does away with the incentive of a lender, and specifically a broker, to do subprime mortgages. So the problem is you're going to have a lot of folks who, could get a loan before for a home that aren't going to be able to get a loan now. So I think this could do more harm than good.
Well, Gary Kaltbaum, some would argue that the people who won't be able to get loans now are people who shouldn't be getting loans in the first place. But is there anything wrong? I mean, let's stick up for the Fed for a second here, or not. What's wrong with requiring that there's no deceptive advertising? And that's one of the things the Fed proposes doing.
First off, I cannot stand up for the Fed. Look, my biggest problem with all this, and I've been saying it for 2 years, they watched it, they saw it, they did nothing about it. They said there was never a problem until it's their problem. Now the same idiots who got it all wrong are trying to fix things. I don't want these guys doing anything to fix things because they've been wrong about everything. Look, this should never happen in the first place. Deceptive practices are illegal. People should go to jail. People should be fined. I don't see any of that happening. Why aren't people getting in trouble for handing out $250,000 mortgages to people without any documents? That's my biggest issue. This is not going to hurt. It's not going to help. Hopefully the lending industry learns their lesson and goes back to the norm.
Pat Powell, I hate excess regulations almost as much as I hate excess taxes. But the one thing that's not on here that I was kind of surprised about was no minimum down payment. That is, a lot of people got into these mortgages without putting a penny down. I grew up thinking you had to put at least 10%, if not 20% down.
Absolutely. The banks used to go out and kick the tires on your house. They used to make sure they'd kick the tires on you as well to make sure that you were going to be able to pay them back. And it's the securitization that has caused banks to basically relax all their regulations. I'm glad that they didn't put in a required minimum down payment, because I think the market can find its own requirements. Suppose you get a big fancy job, you're just out of college, and you get a $500,000 a year job, but you haven't saved enough for a house.
So rent.
But can't you afford a mortgage?
Rent.
If you can find a lender who will give you a mortgage, you should be able to get it. It shouldn't be the Fed who determines. Well, I'm not saying they shouldn't, but I'm just saying it shouldn't be the Fed or you or I determining whether somebody should rent or buy. It should be the overall marketplace.
Sure. Joran, can you just tell me what's wrong with the Fed's sort of good intentions of getting involved and just setting some basic guidelines for getting mortgages and giving mortgages?
Well, everything is wrong with it. They shouldn't be regulating this business to begin with.
I love this guy.
Well, I'm consistent, you know that. I mean, all they can do is mess this up. They're going to dry up the subprime mortgage market, as was noted. But the Fed shouldn't be getting into the business of setting contracts. I mean, they'll take out all innovation out of the markets and so on. Now, if fraud is committed, We have plenty of laws on the books about fraud. We don't need more regulations in order to prosecute people who committed fraud. Let them go to jail. This is just ridiculous. Prepayment penalties, banning those. What's wrong with prepayment penalties?
Well, I think there's something very wrong with the prepayment penalties, and that's when you look at the actual documents and how they put them together, and you look at what the broker's role was in this. They got incentives as much sometimes as 4% of the value of the mortgage to put you into a much higher costing mortgage than what you might otherwise qualify for. Let me finish my point.
And the only way that they could
Hold on, guys.
The only way they could justify those extreme payments was to put in these prepayment penalties. These payments were never disclosed to the buyers, so the buyers had no idea that all of this was going into their mortgage. So I think there are some justifications here.
And none of these borrowers have to take some responsibility over the contracts they sign.
A prepayment penalty is kind of like a back-end sales charge in a mutual fund. I mean, you get a lower cost going in, but look, this should be up to the lenders. I mean, they're going to rediscover. I mean, a down payment. You talk about nothing down. The down payment is the single most important part of a loan, because that's what assures you that the borrower is not going to commit to a mortgage he can't afford, because he doesn't want to lose that down payment. And it protects the lender if they do foreclose, because there's some assets there.
Go ahead, Vicki.
One thing I will credit the Fed for is they're trying to inject more transparency into this market. I think a lot of folks got hosed because they didn't know what they were getting into. They're seeing all these contracts that are in, gobbledygook English. If we could make this process simpler, the system overall would benefit. That's a positive.
Well, tell us how we make it simpler, Victoria.
Well, by putting these contracts in English so people know what they're getting into. Put these contracts in English so people know what they're getting into. More information would help buyers make better decisions.
They knew what they were getting into. They thought they were getting into
exactly what they were getting into.
Hold on,
Don't sign a contract you don't understand.
Stand by, Gary.
Hold on, Gary's here. Look, the biggest problem is this is like eating soup with a fork, what Paulson's proposing and the Fed. The biggest problem right here is the fact that people bought at fantasy prices. They're all underwater. They're better off renting. They're going to still drop the keys off at the doorstep because they're paying off nothing.
Sounds like Dave Ramsey talking, by the way, gang.